Hello, insane children, and welcome to episode 18 of our crowd design discussions for Alice Asylum. We are coming to you today live from our Discord server and joined by our insane children and our mods and our Martin, who is muted because otherwise he would be echoing like crazy. Today we are going to discuss Shadow Alice, but not really. I think today we're going to focus a bit on catching up on where we are so far and also how the process of writing this story for this game is going, and what the goals are in sort of the short and long term. And I'm hoping we'll get some feedback and some ideas from our crowd, from our insane children. So if you would like to follow along, there will be links in the description below over on YouTube. Those will take you to things like our Patreon, where you can sign up, and that will get you access to our Discord server so you could join us live next time. There will also be a link in the description below to the Alice Asylum Wiki, which is over at americanmcgee.com, in case we happen to touch on any of the topics that are contained there. That is the location where we are capturing all of the ideas and concepts that are coming out of this process. So with that, I will turn it over to our mods to see if they've got anything special that they want to add before we kick off.
Welcome back, everybody, and also congratulations, American, on a beautiful, lucky son.
Lucky.
I had to go there.
Thank you very much. Yeah, there is a new little boy in the world whose name is Lucky Jack McGee. In Chinese, it is Ji Ke, and today is his 22nd day on the planet, and he's doing quite well. He seems to be a very good little boy, doesn't cry too much, but he does eat and sleep and poop a lot. So I think he's doing a good job of all that stuff.
Hey.
Yeah.
And from me, personally, because I'm like still half asleep, 18, XVI, correct?
I think so.
Okay.
There's three I's after the after a V and an X. You know?
Good. I wanted to make sure that was correct. It's all good. Hi, everyone.
There you go. All right. So without any further ado, do keep in mind that there is an emoticon for the microphone. So in case you have a microphone, it is attached, it is working, and you have something that you want to contribute to the conversation, do use the microphone emoticon, and that way our mods will call you out and we can make you live, so you can join in the conversation. I think Magus is just doing that as an example. So yeah, the main topic today is actually around chaos. Alice, there's been quite a lot of conversation, it seems, on the idea of Chaos Alice, what she represents, why she's in the game, and how her function in the narrative might ultimately help this young Alice kind of resolve her story. So I did actually post something up over on Patreon in an attempt to strip away what I referred to as the woo-woo. That is the sort of shadows and smoke and the subterfuge that is trying to hide the simple story that's contained underneath all the layers, right? So ultimately, like when we strip down a movie, say take like The Shining, to its most essential core, a lot of times all of the mystic stuff, all the magic, all the horror, everything comes apart, and it just becomes, you know, the story of a man who's going insane, and it's stated fairly simply, but it's all the layers on top of that that will make it a story that is engaging and interesting to us. So I've tried to strip away all the layers and to just lay out here some key points. And so the key points is, you know, that we can talk about. There's a 13-year-old girl. She's sent to the asylum. One of the things that is most important to me personally about what we're trying to tell in this story is young Alice's journey through what they would have called shell shock in that era, but what we would call PTSD today. That is the critical story being told here. How does a young girl transition through that experience? Okay, if we make suggestions and we come up with ideas and we strip everything else away, I would ultimately like us to be left with a story that communicates one's journey through their process of integrating or overcoming an experience which results in PTSD, right? Now, there's another couple of pieces that are important to what we're trying to do here. And I think the easiest way to state one is that we're creating a prequel which has to somehow neatly wrap up a 3-part series where the player has already seen parts 1 and 2, which actually happen in the future of the timeline in which we happen to be playing, right? So there's something akin to kind of like time travel going on in the sense that old Alice has to travel back to and interact with or observe young Alice. And this is another critical point. PTSD is important to me. And there's one more point, and that is the integration of the lost child self back into the adult once the PTSD process has sort of run its course, right? So I kind of view that as one of the final steps that someone would take in the healing process. So those two pieces are really important to me. Everything else is just lipstick on the pig. Everything else, Shadow Alice, where she's going, what she's doing. This is all just interpretive dance. It's a kind of thing on top of, or layers on top of, what I feel are those two very critical points about what we're trying to do with the story. So that's that. I hope that serves as an okay intro. And I think with that, maybe I'd like to know what's going on. Like, what are the questions? What are the concerns? And how might we move forward or answer or address those things?
I see
I see
Greg's
that
typing
Greg,
everything out. Yeah.
Greg is
We're
typing.
ready.
It's going to be a novel. It's going to be a book.
You just want to speak
But
it
I mean,
out, Greg?
chicken. But is he one of the chickens that can type with both of his feet and claws, or does he just use his beak?
Well,
No,
he is an
it's
octo
chicken,
chicken, so he has
so he uses
tentacles.
tentacles. Jinx.
Oh, I see. Jinx. Okay, so that's an interesting thing. He's asking, so is post AMR Alice essentially guiding, narrating the story from her POV over events from her youth? Okay, so here's the thing. I like that idea a lot. I like that we might end up in that place, but we haven't actually decided that yet. It's that what you just said there, Greg. The idea that what I would call adult Alice at the end of Alice Madness Returns is viewing the actions or replaying the actions of child Alice, the one that's in Asylum. It could be, like you said, like a narrator, over the events, or it could be that we encapsulated her into a character we call Shadow Alice, and Shadow Alice is kind of misunderstood because, hey, there's this other version of me who seems bigger and darker and more powerful, who's sort of shadowing me wherever I go. She must be nefarious. She must be against me, right? Until at the end it's revealed, like, hey, no, haha, it was always me behind the mask, and I'm actually here to help you and to bring you forward into the future where everything's fine because we killed that motherfucker. So I think what I'd like to say, Greg, is what you've just outlined there is a possible outcome, but we're still in the quantum fog. We're still in the realm of all of the possibilities, except for the 2 points that I laid out as the sort of foundation: the journey through PTSD and the reintegration of the child's self. How we properly communicate that and encapsulate that in the interaction between these characters, we haven't defined that yet. And I think in talking with some of the other insane children, I've understood that people might feel a bit uncomfortable, like, hey, what is it? What is the thing? What's the end? What's the answer? And I want to say that that's not how I work. In fact, I don't know that that's how a lot of writers work. My understanding of my writing process, and I understand this to be very similar to other writers, is you lay out some parameters. So say like it's the Eight Little Indians way of writing. You establish a tin can. That tin can could be a haunted campground, or it could be a spaceship, or it could be a hotel up in the mountains that's closed for the winter, and then you establish your Indians, and then you put the Indians in your tin can and you shake it up, and then you see what happens. Well, that's what we're doing. We've established the kind of ground rules for, hey, we're in an asylum, we're in this young girl's imagination, we've got to get from point A to point B, here's some of the actors, now let's shake it up and let's see where it goes. Wendy says, I low-key hope there's no spoilers of the future, but I'd also like to see a little bit of adult Alice. I assume that comment means we want to see Alice after Alice Madness returns. And that's something that I've been thinking about, because at the very last scene of Alice Madness Returns, we see her walking off into something that I've called Lunderland. That is a kind of combination of London and Wonderland. And I've been trying to think about how we sort of retcon or, reintegrate that final scene into something that leads to adult Alice going on the journey towards reintegration with child Alice, right? Now, whether or not we see that reintegrated whole, the two of them together, and like you've just said here, maybe she is going to prison for murder after pushing Bumby in front of that train. We don't know yet, but that could be one of the things that we finally stumble into while shaking the can, right?
Well, he stumbled into a train, so yeah, I'd say that.
We didn't stumble into it. He kind of
that's what happened. I swear, Governor.
Yeah.
But we did bring up in the past, sorry to cut you off real there, about her telling the story, adult Alice telling about her past, and having some narrative designs around that. So that has been a topic we have touched on.
We have. And like I said, that still exists in the cloud of possibilities for me. When I think about this, I've yet to see it crystallize. So, there's a lot of times where I'll be sat around thinking about it and I'll think like, oh yeah, adult Alice saying something, recounting this from a narrative perspective. Maybe it's adult Alice telling the story to her child, or maybe it's adult Alice in jail for the murder of Bumby, and having to explain to her cellmate how the hell she ended up in this place. Anyway, I mean, these are all possibilities. I feel like, as I sometimes say, this is sort of the end of the story, is putting the cart before the horse, because we've not yet traveled. I mean, we're still just in the process of exploring anger in terms of the realms that she's going to travel through. And maybe it's been frustrating that it's taken us this long to really start up the process of exploring the realms, but we are now properly exploring the realms, and I think out of that is going to come all of the information, which eventually piles up into the obvious ending to the adventure that she's on.
Now, another thing that I wanted to bring up too is talking about having an older Alice basically being an antagonist. It reminds me of the TV show The Magicians. And without giving spoilers, that show, there is a concept there of having an older character interact with her younger self. Something that can be looked at.
Well, and this is, Greg saying, a time-traveling older Alice affecting past events like a self-fulfilling causality loop might hurt people's brains, but this is Wonderland. So here's the thing. Within ourselves, we are able to peer into our pasts, right? We're able to try to connect with ourselves as children. I mean, that's one of the things, and you may think it's hokey or it's sort of new agey or whatever, but there's this whole concept of the inner child, and the idea that, at some point, in order to become adults, we start to take on and affect all these behaviors and outward appearances. There was, Joseph Campbell and others referring to this as the masks that we wear. So this idea that somewhere underneath all of that, inside of us, is that child who we were, when we were 5, when we were 10, when we were 12, but that over time we've beat that child down, and we've told that child that it's wrong, and that it, it can't behave like that in public, and it can't speak in silly voices. So we've spent our entire adult lives, Megas typing, Um, so we spend our entire adult lives beating down our inner child. And so, according to the inner child theory, we should reach back and we should apologize and we should become one with our inner child again. It it kind of feels to me like, again, that is a final step in the process, especially PTSD as it was experienced by a child. That child was left in a very wounded place while the adult said, "You stay here. You're weak. You can't be helpful in the battles to come. You stay back here, and I'll come back to get you eventually." um, so now that inner child is going to feel it was abandoned. It's going to feel that it was left to rot and that it couldn't be important and it couldn't help in resolving the problems. And it's going to be pissed off, right? It's going to be short on trust and very long on anger. So that's part of what Shadow Alice may be up against in the sort of conversation or the battle with Child Alice, is to regain her trust. That is, in that sense, though, back to the original thing, that is the time travel. That is adult Alice going back to deal with, solve the problems of the young Alice. So we've got a couple of other comments here. Go ahead. I don't know if Katie is trying to speak or if that's just microphone noise.
Yeah. Sorry. My thing is there's not going to be a problem with the story, the continuation of the story, because it's not really time travel. She's not going back in time and changing events and changing the outcome. She's just going back within herself. So the story,
That's correct.
how her story played out is not going to change.
That is correct. Yeah, we're not going back to alter the past. This is not Back to the Future. This is Alice going and tinkering as she's always done. I mean, this has been her thing. It's sort of, she is the explorer of her own psyche, and she's the one who's going in there and resolving all the problems of her real world via the battles that she fights in her imagination. So this is just more of the same. The result here, the effect that it would have on the real world, is that once she's completed this particular mission, adult Alice, takes the next step as a whole person as opposed to a fractured person. And so maybe that's part of what we want to try to show with the final scenes of this game, is that Alice isn't just walking off into Lunderland, but she's doing so side by side with her child self, or with her actual child. As I think Wendy or someone said, maybe we see her adult Alice in some life after all of this.
What if she's giving her child her rabbit to kind of play that all together? Is that something that is that would be the focal point?
That would be a beautiful and final scene, sort of the mother passing the rabbit on to the child type of thing, for sure.
But again, we're not working on the ending right now. We're working on what gets us to there. So,
well, I just want to be clear. Like, it's perfectly okay for us to throw these types of ideas out there into the cloud, and to say at the end, the rabbit is handed to, and that can be, it can try to be a tendril that works its way back. So it's not wrong to think about the ending. It's just that I don't want to like pin an ending and be like, that is absolutely heading. These things should all kind of grow towards each other. The stuff we've already laid out should grow towards the end. The end should grow towards the middle should grow in both directions. Does that make sense? It's like kind of organic process.
Yeah, we just need a giant board, some red twine, and we'll figure out who the real killer is. Gotcha.
That is exactly what we're doing, actually. So let's see. I did see a couple of questions. Seafoam asks, does Shadow Alice in some form represent Alice's puberty? I don't think that Shadow Alice, like if we were to just put Shadow Alice as a concept aside, what we're saying right now is there's an adult Alice and a child Alice. What I would say is that inside of the journey of Alice Asylum, we definitely need to recognize the power of, Alice as a 13-year-old girl transitioning into becoming an adult, the power that that's going to play out on her psyche. What form that takes in terms of representation, is it Shadow Alice? I don't know. I hadn't really, I think we had written on the wiki that, yeah, the Shadow Alice could represent sort of the rebellious side. It could be linked to her older sister. It could be, but I don't know that that's a critical thing right now in terms of that's going to sort of fill out all the details for the story we're trying to write. I think it's one aspect of the story that we're trying to write. I know that's not an incredibly useful answer, but yeah. Magus says, yeah, but without spoiling everything, if it is just Alice talking to a younger self, works if that is the only aspect of time travel. That's right. Yeah. This is just going back to the point that we're not doing time travel as an adult, going back to the Asylum days and somehow actually altering the events of the real world. No, we're not doing that. When we say time travel, you might just say that we are reliving something. We are reliving a memory. I have this idea in my mind, though, that young Alice in the Asylum narrative sort of loop, she may be doing a sort of Groundhog Day type of thing, where she's been left back there to fight this battle, and she just keeps fighting it over and over again. That I'm not fully formed on this, but one of the reasons I'm thinking about that is because when you're coping with the fallout of events that lead to PTSD, very often you'll hear it said that you don't cure PTSD. It doesn't go away, but the effects of it just become less and less. But in many ways, it is a kind of cyclical experience that it flares up. Something triggers a memory, a sound, a smell, a word, and suddenly you're back in a particular aspect of that fight, and that issue of being re-triggered and re-triggered and re-triggered can go on for years. It can go on for the rest of a person's life. And so I kind of had this idea that, when adult Alice is back there, once again, kind of reviewing child Alice's, whatever her existence has been, she will realize that, wow, while I was off fighting the battles and being the badass, this little girl was back here suffering this pain over and over and over and over and over again, until I was finally able to come back here, grab her hand, and sort of pull her out of that loop. So that's something, I don't know exactly what that is yet, but again, throw it up into the cloud and we'll try to see if it turns into something. Just looking at your comments, and if anybody has a microphone and wants to jump in, that's cool.
Greg, come here, Greg.
Seafoam says, well, imagine the idea that child Alice is left behind. Yes. And her anger and fear and confusion manifests into the black ooze we see all through AMR. Yeah, I love this idea. And it kind of goes to what I was just now saying, of the idea that child Alice has run in this sort of background loop through this horrible experience of the events which we're going to call Alice Asylum. But she's just been fighting that over and over again. And she's been trying to bottle up these memories and bottle up these fears. And it could be, as Seafoam has suggested here, that process has been this little engine that has generated things that we've seen in the later games. The memory bottles, for instance. I think it'd be interesting if, like, in Asylum, we actually see Alice bottle up memories that are triggers, and then it's later on in Madness Returns that those are the very same bottles that we break open in order to recover those memories, because now that's important that the train is destroying them. The black ooze, same thing. Maybe in Asylum we see little Alice going around, and somehow what she's doing creates the ooze. She's converting, negative emotions into that, but it then manifests itself later on. It's an externality.
Alice just wrote something really cool that would make
Uh-huh.
sense. She wrote, that actually makes me think. Ah, shit. It got scrolled up. That actually makes me think about the shrinking violets and the secret drawings on the walls, and the idea that they were drawn by Alice, who has done the loop a million times, but it's only that time that she finally breaks it.
There you go. Love it. That's a fantastic idea. It fits exactly in with what we're talking about. So these little bits where, people playing the game at some point are going to be like, wow, this is really smart. How'd they together?
Mhm.
And this is exactly the point. That's a fantastic idea. And I think that's why, like, there are elements of all this that work really well. There are these little bits and pieces that we can connect back together and make it seem like it does fit. And that's one of the reasons why I want to be careful about going too quickly towards trying to define the ending, because we're stumbling along and finding little gems like that, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just going through and reading some more of these comments. Lucas says he thought that the black ooze was the doll maker bleeding all over Wonderland. Yeah, I mean it's true, but you have to also keep in mind that we can always explain that, well, the doll maker, as Seafoam says, is a monster of Alice's creation. Perhaps it's this process that she's doing that is actually creating the goo that he has to use to form up into the monster at some point, right? Seafoam says it doesn't necessarily mean that the doll maker created the ruin or the ooze. It could be that little Alice did that, but didn't realize that that was then going to create other problems down the line. So, this is one of those places where you could say that, in the realm of treating PTSD, bottling things up is not good. It just creates more problems down the line. But we would see little Alice going around and bottling things up. And so, maybe that manifests itself as problems further down the line.
In one of your posts, you also brought up the fact of putting things in bottles, again, like shops or other aspects of that too. So we keep bringing this bottling up. In Alice in Wonderland, there's a lot of bottling up also.
Yeah, exactly.
And moving into PTSD, that works very well.
Yeah, for sure. Greg says, could use that idea of Shadow Alice appearing talking through mirrors to observe events. Also could be used to set up reveals events later in the story regarding the unity of the two characters. Yeah, I mean, this is when this became the topic of what we ought to talk about today. It got my brain all twisted up trying to figure out, if I had to answer the question today of who is Shadow Alice and how do we interact with her. And I went back, I looked at the wiki page, I looked at some stuff we'd said on some live streams. It's just not clear to me yet. And I feel like what Greg's said here, it's a good idea. It kind of makes sense, but I don't know exactly how I don't know how it becomes one of those perfect facets in the thing we're trying to craft yet. You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like we will get to a point where we'll go like, oh yeah, throughout this whole adventure, there should be this interface with these mirrors, and this is why it's going to work. And I just don't know if we're there yet. But yeah, this is one of those challenges. It's one of those tendrils. Like, as we fill in the blanks everywhere else, we need to keep coming back to and touching that question. All right, other comments and other questions. So Ancient Child says, perhaps there could be a connection between the ick coming out of her involuntarily as a child and becoming manifest as an adult. Yeah, for sure. The statue in the Vale of Tears, everybody's talking about, okay, and that one ends up crying the black ruin stuff as well. Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of elements like that we could try to figure out, how little Alice would be, in effect, the creator of those things. Again, if she's sort of this process that's been running in the background the whole time while the adult Alice has been doing all these other things, uh, it'd be interesting to see that she's kind of like at the center of the matrix. She's the librarian, but she doesn't realize it. She is the origin for a lot of the things that we see in the games. Again, the adult Alice, the Alice in the games we've played, just doesn't realize that yet. And so, that there could be something quite special in all of that. So, do we have any other concerns or questions about Chaos Alice or this adult and child Alice dynamic specifically? Or about the process, I guess, is another thing.
Yeah, Luca just mentioned the "Would you kindly" moment, and that's something I really do like about the Shadow Alice aspect, is having that scene of just things.
Yeah, and the challenge there is that, obviously the first and second Alice don't have that sort of, call that a trigger line, like "Would you kindly." We weren't thinking about that. I mean, if one of us could go back and somehow find that there's a thread that goes through AMA and AMR that somehow would kind of make sense in that context, I just don't remember, even in the recent playthroughs, ever seeing, because I was keeping an eye open for something like that. I never really saw anything that I felt like we could make as a hook and have that powerful of a revelation. But I think that doesn't stop us from trying to create a good revelation. It's not going to be that all encompassing, but it could be a good one. Ancient Child says we can revisit the scenes in the area where we walk through the asylum with everything oversized and exaggerated, and make them more explained in detail in AA. Oh my God, guys, this is an AA meeting. I get it. There's a bit of a pun there. Har har. So this is an Alice Asylum meeting, but that would also make it an AA meeting.
Haha.
That's good. Hi, my name is American McGee, and I'm an addict. It's only been about 24 hours since the last time I drank alcohol, and that was by mistake because I ordered an iced tea and the waiter brought me a Long Island iced tea, and so I sipped alcohol for the first time since April, and I wasn't happy about it.
Okay.
I thought you said you were being good lately. So.
What about
I haven't had
hot
alcohol.
sauce?
I've not had a drink since April, and I don't want to be preachy about it, but that is a very good thing to do, is to get away from alcohol. Until yesterday, when the waitress accidentally brought me, and I had one sip of a Long Island iced tea.
Turning that chip.
Yeah. Oops. Would that count if you accidentally drink a sip of alcohol?
Not at all.
Okay. So I don't have to turn in my chip. Does anybody want to go next? Their AA story?
I'm Magus, and I need a drink right now after all of this. I mean...
I'm there with you.
Okay. So maybe we pivot a little bit here, because I did want to talk about, and this links up with the fact that it's been a month really since we all talked, and we kind of looked at where the progress was. I do want to talk really quickly about just progress in general. So this is going to be a little bit less creative and maybe a little bit more process oriented in terms of the overall, like what we're trying to do with the Asylum project. So we are still talking with EA, but they still haven't officially signed off on a license agreement. And, that part obviously has been the goal all along. And yet we have in hand the draft, like what you call a term sheet for what that license agreement would look like. And the license agreement, of course, is what we would then take and go and secure funding from, an alternate publisher, financer like Amazon or whatever. And so I want to say, like, the communication is still happening with EA. It took a twist. I can't detail, but you could maybe kind of guess, like, we're doing all this work, we're producing all this fantastic art and story. EA's on the verge of giving us a deal that says that we can go off and do it by ourselves, and then something happened. Now, I can't say what that something was, but you're smart, and I'm sure you can figure out what EA might have come back and said, like, hey, wait a second. So that's where we've been stuck since whenever it was that I came back and said, hey, there's some big stuff going on. It looks like there might be some movement. But since that point, the movement has gone to sort of like EA super slow-mo mode. And then it got caught up in the summer, which apparently means everybody goes on vacation, and nothing gets done. And as of, I think, a week ago, I was told, oh, you should have some sort of update within the next 2 weeks, which would bring us up into October of this year of 2019. In the meantime, I do want to be clear that, like, I've actually taken the space that's being provided to us by EA moving very slowly as a gift. I don't mind it. I, of course, would love us to get the game into production sooner versus later. But I want to be clear that, like, what we're doing right now is a kind of luxury that a lot of games don't get, or it's a luxury that you don't realize that a lot of games do get. So a lot of really big games with massive and really creative stories, they do spend 2 years with massive teams of writers and creatives to put all that stuff together before they go into development. Now, with the first 2 Alice games, we never really had that luxury, and so this will be the first time with an Alice game that we have had that luxury. Plus, we're engaging you, the audience, in doing that. So this is all a kind of roundabout, long-winded way of saying things are still moving, but of course things are moving really slowly. But I hope that we all understand that things moving slowly is in some ways nice, because it gives us a chance to be here and to flesh out all this story stuff and to make the story and the game and the design and everything as wonderful as it can be before the money starts to flow towards development. So that's kind of, I think that kind of captures like where we're at in terms of on the deal making side of things, and the speed at which we're doing these crowd design and story. I'm not trying to push it to go faster. And so if there's anybody kind of sat around going like, why is this taking longer? I can't push EA to go faster. And as far as what we're doing on the crowd design stuff, we're already going about as fast as we can go, given that we are actually quite a small team. Like, the number of artists that we have working is still quite small, because they're not all full time, because it's it's not a big enough project yet to support that. So I do want to make sure that if there's anybody out there that's concerned about these things, we talk about it. And as I've said before, if EA comes back and says, hey, this just isn't going to happen, we don't want to see another Alice game made, this is dead, well, I'll turn around and I'll make that clear to everybody. But up until that point that happens, I'm still going to operate on the faith that EA wants to see a new Alice game made, and that the things that we're working on very slowly in the background will eventually lead to that happening. So that's kind of the process update. So I don't know if anybody has any questions about that, any concerns about that, but this would be a good time to voice.
So we're going to turn into a gotcha, epic exclusive mobile game. Is that what I'm hearing?
No. By the way, I think the format of that is, so what you're saying is we're going to become a... No. So again, I can't put too fine a point on exactly what's going on behind the scenes. But let me just say that the party with which we're having the most serious conversations about funding and publishing the new Alice game at this point has made it clear that there's been a shift away from free-to-play and back towards single-player narrative-driven games. And
Yes.
were that news to get out in an official manner from that entity, the headlines would be big and they would be worldwide. But that company has not yet made a statement to that effect. But that is what I have been told. Um, so anyway, again, it's a company that shall remain unnamed, but you're smart people. I'm sure you can figure it out. But
So
that is actually what's happened, is that there's been a shift within the industry, and people are now going, oh, hey, that Red Dead Redemption thing made $1 billion in a weekend. Maybe we ought to be making single-player story-driven games again, right?
so Half-Life 3 confirmed.
Yeah, exactly. So what you're saying is Alice 3 is actually Half-Life 3. Yes.
Yes, it's Half-Life 3. That's where the G-Man and everything come from. There we go. Solved.
Yes.
Mystery.
Yeah. So I mean, this is all big. It's all really interesting. Just all really slow, right? It's all incredibly slow. And one of the things is I don't want to be this is all part of the game. Like the moment that if I were to write to any of the parties that we're talking to and be like, hey guys, hurry up, you've just lost. You've just lost your negotiating power. So for as long as we can kind of sit back and be cool and give the impression that, hey, we're perfectly fine just, cranking away on concepts and art and story and we're not worried over here. The longer we can do that, then the more power we have in the ultimate negotiation towards like what we want, how it gets made, all these kinds of things. So that's I think that's an update on the process stuff. Again, I'm curious if there's any questions or any concerns, if anybody sort of doesn't understand that, or Octo Chicken says, I've waited a decade for this game. Time. Yeah, same here. Magus has got that famous quote from Miyamoto: the delayed game is eventually good, but a bad game is forever. Yeah. That is a very appropriate quote for where we're at. So, yeah, as long as everyone here is happy, I'm trying to keep the pipeline flowing with like fun little physical stuff for people to acquire, so it doesn't feel like you're just pouring cash into a hole and then there's like nothing coming out of physical consequence. Just so clear about like why we do that. I want people to be able to hold on to stuff and be like, hey, I got a thing for the money I spent, So, I'm hopeful that we'll see some sort of a shift in the way that the process is working. We'll see a shift in the conversation with those people that we're working to get this done with. But in the meantime, we continue like we're doing. We continue working on the story. We continue cranking out art, which I think is fantastic, and continue getting feedback from everybody. I'm really enjoying this process. So yeah, Seafoam says helping design this game with makes me feel the most happy, and I can wait. That's good. I feel the same way. Lucas says, wasn't the case with Duke Nukem Forever or Daikatana, but I know what you're saying. Yeah, those are different because those were actually in development, and burning massive money, and they were suffering a lot of design creep and design lack of direction while they were actually building the game, which is something that I would like us to avoid by having as much of our design and story done prior to when the team goes to work on building the game. So Ancient Child says, to be honest, I'm just enjoying the community. The amount of like-minded support and friendship has been so amazing. Greg, the Octo Chicken, says, it's a fun community to hang out with. Great art gets made. We get to see behind the scenes of a video game development and polish a story to a level that this series probably hasn't seen before. Well, there you go. Good. So our AA meetings are the best, apparently. That is good to know.
I think just how you've laid things out, explained what's going on, kind of taken the ribbon off the box helps a lot with making people feel like they are spending good money towards it, or bad money, or whatever kind of money they want to throw at people. So
that's good. I'm glad to hear that. So why don't we, because we still have about 15, 20 minutes left until the end of today's session, and I don't want to just leave us hanging. We can just really quickly jump over to the topic which has been growing of the Queen of Hearts domain and this idea that she's going to harness the sun and that's going to sit underneath her castle, and it's supposed to be a kind of analog to turning anger towards some purpose. And I'd just be kind of curious if we've got any feedback on that. The most recent post on Patreon, we also shared a card guard who is made out of metal.
That
The
guy
idea.
was so fucking badass. That I love that.
So I'm really curious about your feedback on him, because in our private comments on our Trello board, there was a little bit of uncertainty. There were some people who were saying, "Hey, no, card guards should be card, and what's this metal thing?" And
I don't know what they're bugging about that. That's probably the coolest design I've seen in a long time.
Also, if it
Really?
works with the realm, then that's fine. I mean, it's still a card. You can still take what it is.
Yeah, it could be like a heavy duty one, like a tanky card guard.
It's tanky card. It's thick card guard.
There you go.
yeah, well, I mean, I also wrote into that post that perhaps this guy is powered by the area in which he exists. In other words, if the sun is under her castle, and then this guy is designed to survive in the heat of that environment, perhaps he also needs to be in that environment in order to operate, so we wouldn't see him anywhere else, or see the ones like him. I think I only posted the one picture, but there's actually, Norm did a whole study on these guys, and they're super cool. I was trying to kind of tease those and to suggest that we will show more of them during the live stream this week. Let me see if I can pull up another one of these, because he did about 10 images, and he's really put a lot of thought into like what they are, what they look like. They're pretty damn cool.
Give us another tease. Yes, tease us more.
Yeah, the only problem is Norm likes to output like 10 megabyte JPEGs. I think he's just sending us his sketches directly. There it goes.
All right.
There's the faces of some of these guys. So he's clearly putting a lot of emotion and character into them. And when I look at those, I think, man, those are like main characters in a game by themselves.
Yeah, I like the top two on the right, on the top. Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. So Seafoam says that Queen Domain has been the favorite so far. Yeah, I really like the Queen Domain as well. I feel like our team was, I don't know, I don't want to say that the Circus Realm didn't produce some cool stuff, because it did, but I don't feel like the Circus Realm had the same kind of direction, and we're going to probably have to go back and fix it, because I think that the idea that she stealths around and it's not clear who the enemies are and it's not clearly about a battle has been to the detriment of that realm. Whereas in the Queen's realm, like what's coming out of it, it's sort of like Wrath of Khan. It's clearer that there's an enemy and we're in a bad place and like we got to go to war. And the enemy designs and the area designs are all very indicative of that. So thinking Denial needs some help, but we'll probably come back to that. So yeah, we're getting the sun harnessing thing pops the song Black Hole Sun in for some reason. It's a very good song. You should go listen to the old Westy version of that was on the soundtrack for Westworld, because that's a really cool player piano version of that. What else have we got here? A card left alone in a sun furnace might just catch on fire if not covered up. Yeah, it'd be kind of funny to see like the traditional card guards trying to run into this area to chase Alice.
They just burn right out.
And having them burst into flames. But it looks like the feedback on these card guards is pretty positive. So that's good.
That'd make a cool cutscene, honestly, though. Like, they're just chasing her, they burst into flames, she turns around, and there's those heavy-duty card guards standing before her.
Yeah, that always kind of results in a fun little jokey like, I've escaped those guys, and then turn around to realize that there's something much worse than them
Yep.
waiting further down the hall. He's got another one of these here. Yeah, this one's like 5 meg. Oh, well, let's see what this does to the VPN.
5 isn't too bad though.
But through a VPN across your finger.
Ooh.
And there's also this work getting done on the dungeon, the Queen's Castle. So we've got quite a lot coming out. Jennifer also put up these, and this didn't get shared yet, but she's got this idea for gameplay, which is captured within the stained glass of Queen's Castle. And so she's done these things, which are pretty
It's like
cool.
kind of going 2D, I guess.
Oh, that reminds me
Yes.
of the Wind Waker, their art, stained glass art.
Yep. Yeah. So she's got some pretty good ideas in there. But yeah, I think that the Queen's domain is turning out pretty cool. So looking forward to further exploration of that. But yeah, curious if there's any feedback, concerns, questions about what's been outlined there so far.
Give me one sec.
Seem to like that.
Oops.
They want a poster.
The other thing that we need to talk about is the Bumby store in the train station. I was surprised that we didn't see more feedback on that, but I kind of got the sense that there were some people resisting the idea that we would see him and the role that he might play. So I was kind of curious if that had any comments that people wanted to share as well. Like, are we good with him being the guy who supplies the weapons? Are we good with the idea of her interacting with him? Luca says 221132251.
32119202520851855, whatever that means.
Did he just paste a password in? Everybody go try to hack his accounts now.
Yeah, quickly.
Okay, well, it seems very quiet today, so I'm guessing people's brains are spinning with all the possibilities. We are only a few minutes away from wrapping up here towards that. Does anybody have any last minute comments, any concerns about any of the stuff that was discussed today? While we're waiting for our insane children to perhaps share some thoughts, I will say to those of you who were listening in over on YouTube, this has not been a live broadcast. You've been listening to a recording. So if you've been typing furiously into the comments in response to the questions we've been asking, then you might want to go delete those comments to save yourself some ridicule. If you would like to join our live streams or these Discord chat sessions in the future, do consider becoming a patron. You can do that via the links in the description below. Those links will also take you over to the Asylum Wiki, where you will find a lot of the artwork and story stuff that we've discussed today is recorded, and there's actually a system there that you can write comments onto those pages. So maybe if you've got some good ideas for what we do with all this stuff, that might be a good place to share it. It seems that Wendy is doing the episode of SpongeBob where he forgets his name. That's what her brain is doing. And Katia says she doesn't think her mic is working. Otherwise, maybe she might join in.
Mm-hmm.
Alice on Elm Street says, in AMA and AMR, the Mad Hatter was replacing people's parts with mechanical parts. What if these card guards have pretty much just had everything replaced? Yeah, I mean, these card guards are definitely going to be the creation of the Mad Hatter. I think it's a kind of automatic conclusion that anything mechanical and is going to be a Mad Hatter invention in Wonderland. And I think for sure that when we go to talk to the Queen, she's going to explain that the Hatter was doing something for her, but he's now run away, and you got to go find him and bring him back. So yeah, I think that makes sense. We're getting a little more conversation on SpongeBob SquarePants, who lives in a pineapple beneath the sea, but that is not the topic of today's discussion. Acadia says, the only thing about this image I don't like is like Bumby. That's a fair point. I don't know what else we might have him look like. I've understood that we might sort of dress him up a bit or kind of costume him up a bit.
Make him look cleaner, happier.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like that he looks like Bumby. Alice certainly would have seen him. She would have known him. And I like the idea that there could be something that happens in this game which sort of sends him flying off into space. Like, he's like, what was that Superman movie where the bad guys were somehow imprisoned in those like space mirrors that were flung off into space? You guys are all probably too young to know. But anyway, it was like General Zod, right? So eventually, the mirrors like crash on the moon and break open, and like, aha, we're free, and we're go mess with that planet over there. I'm just thinking like something similar could happen at the end of Asylum, where like Bumby's captured in a space mirror, and he's flung off, and it doesn't come back until Madness returns. So there could be a kind of setup for the disappearance, the temporary disappearance of Bumby until he reappears again. So we'll see. Okay, well, we've come up on the hour, and Luca is still punching odd numbers into the chat here. So that's it. Why don't we resume again on Thursday? We're going to have a YouTube live stream, and there's a ton of art and stuff that we can look at then. And then we'll do another crowd design session 2 weeks hence. So I will say thank you to all the insane children for joining us today. Anybody? It's very quiet.
I was clicking about, sorry.
It's been too long, everyone. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you, American, for doing this. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Martin, for trying to put up with the Great Firewall. Even though you can't be here, you're with us anyway. Thank you, Arcadia, that your mic has died. Thank you, everyone.
Alrighty. Oh, there it is. The stereo visual found the GIF of the bad guys trapped in the space mirror.
Yep.
All right, way to go, team. Okay, well, I will talk to all of you again on Thursday. So jib it up and talk to you later. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.